G'day mate, how you going? Paul here again with another video. Hey, today we're just doing a video on lightning photography. Just the very basics, nothing too technical. I live in Darwin, probably one of the lightning capitals of the world, so very lucky, with storms and lightning, a lot of opportunities. But yeah, I often get asked the question, how do you capture lightning on a camera? So yeah, this isn't an advanced video at all, not very technical, it's just the real basics. So it's aimed at anyone with a camera who might just be interested in getting out and getting some good photos of lightning. So there are some more advanced topics, just to do with storm photography and getting the most out of lightning and all sorts of stuff. But this will at least just help you record lightning on your camera, which you want to do, and still get some really good shots. One thing I really want to mention at the start of this video is safety, of course. It can be quite dangerous. All those normal dangers you'd get with sort of, extreme weather perhaps. But yeah, lightning is the main danger, of course. So yeah, safety first. It's not worth your life to get a cool picture, of course. All right, so what's our first requirement for getting good lightning photography, or any lightning photography for that matter? Well, our first requirement is having a good view of a storm. That sounds pretty obvious, doesn't it? So why mention it? Well, the reason I mention it is it's actually a lot trickier than you'd think. It's quite an art to actually getting in a location where you have a good view of a storm. The reason being is they're pretty unpredictable. You'll get somewhere and it's already on top of you and it's raining and you can't take photos in the rain very easily. Storm chasing is just as much about knowing good vantage points and knowing where the storm might end up, and getting a good angle of that storm to get pictures. So yeah, the only reason I mention it is actually not as easy as it sounds. It does take a bit of experience. Learn how to read your local weather radar, and yeah, the more storms you keep track of and chase, and you'll just get better at it. It's like anything, I guess. Alright guys, we're back in the office and we're probably at the part of the video you've been waiting for, and that is what do we need and how do we need to set it. So yeah, let's get straight into it. We need a camera that we can set to manual, well, one that we can have fairly full control over. Some of these little point and shoot cameras, that they just work automatically and you don't have much control over them. Yeah, so if you've got a camera you can mostly control and set the settings that you like, yeah, that's pretty much essential for lightning photography. We need a tripod, just need a good solid base. We can't have the camera moving because we are taking long exposures, and I'll get onto that. You may wonder what sort of lens we need. Thankfully, any lens will pretty much do. If your lens fits the viewing that you're trying to get, whether it's a distant storm or a close storm, wide angle or a little bit more zoomed in, your lens will be fine. Any sort of kit lens or lens you may have should be fine. All right, so how do we set our camera up? What do we set it to? What settings do we use? Well, we're going to have to get a little bit technical, but not much, don't worry. I'm not going to go into the hows and whys of these settings. I'm just going to tell you what they are and what you set them to, basically. And maybe I'll just touch on the hows and whys, but yeah, this is just a basic video, of course. So we have three settings that we need to worry about first, and these all affect our exposure, like how bright or dark the image is, basically. And that is, and you would have heard of these, and I'll only go over them quickly. It's shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Now your shutter speed is just how long the photo is being taken, or how long the exposure is, how long the shutter in your camera opens to let the light in. We're going to go for a 30-second exposure. So yeah, basically you'll change your shutter speed to 30 seconds. I don't know what model of camera you got. Look up the manual or Google it. But it should be fairly relatively straightforward to set your shutter speed to 30 seconds. It might be designated with a 30 with a little double quote symbol for the seconds. So that's your 30 seconds. Our next setting out of those three is aperture. Now aperture is a little bit like your iris in your eye. There's a iris inside every lens that opens and closes, and your aperture is basically that, how much light's going through your lens at any one time. Now there's these weird f numbers, f-stops, you might have heard of that before. Don't worry about it too much, it's just a representation of how much light's coming through your lens. Basically, the smaller the number, the more wide angle, the more wide open your lens is, and the bigger the number, the more closed your aperture is, and this is something you can adjust, of course. Now most lenses range in their maximum aperture. It could be an f2.8, which is quite wide, or f4 or f5.6. Again, don't worry too much about these numbers. This is just a beginner's video. Suffice to say, for most lightning photography that we're going to worry about now, you want your aperture at pretty much the smallest number you can go on your lens. So if it's an f4 lens, put it on f4. it might be handy just to go one down from that. So maybe if it's an f4 lens, go to f5.6. This is something you can just play with. It depends on the distance of the lightning and all that sort of stuff. Just one quick note on aperture. If the lightning is really close, like it's only a kilometre or so away, you really might want to wind your aperture down to something like f16 because it's surprisingly bright when it gets close. But for most lightning, yeah, around the f4, f5.6, that'll be fine. The third item was ISO, wasn't it? Now ISO, it is just the sensitivity of your sensor. You can adjust the sensitivity. Now, a lot of people new to lightning photography think, or any nighttime photography think, oh, you've got to wind it right up, make it really sensitive because it's dark and you're trying to capture this really quick lightning. But actually the opposite is true. We want a nice low ISO. Any lightning worth photographing is bright enough to be captured easily at a low ISO. And we want to keep our ISO down because that keeps the noise or that ugly grainy look we get to images with high ISO. We want to keep that out of our images, so we want to set our ISO low. So most cameras, the minimum ISO might be 100 or 200. Set it down there somewhere. So that's our 3 settings for exposure. Shutter speed, 30 seconds. Let's just keep it simple. We'll go with 30 seconds. Aperture, keep it fairly wide open. F4, 5.6, whatever your widest setting is. Maybe the next one down. And ISO nice and low, 100, 200, whatever your lowest is. Now the next setting we need to set is a bit of a tricky one, unfortunately, and there's a few gotchas with it. It doesn't sound too hard, but it's one that traps us quite a bit, and I'd be the first to admit I've taken a heap of storm photos and been quite impressed with what I thought I got, and then only to get home and find the images are unusable. And this setting is focus. Doesn't sound too tricky, does it? But basically, because we're photographing at night time and it's something that, a lightning bolt's instant, we can't rely on our autofocus. I don't know if you've ever noticed autofocus sort of hunting backwards and forwards even in low light areas. For nighttime photography and lightning, it's just a no-goer. So there's 2 things we have to consider with focus. We have to set our focus to manual focus. That's normally pretty straightforward. Again, you check your manual for your modeler camera. And the other factor with focus is we need to set our focus to infinity. Now what does that mean? Well, I think we all know what infinity means. It means a long way or forever. Basically we're setting our focus to its furthest focal distance. Now with lenses it's a bit weird. Basically anything from the distance of a star, for example, an unlimited length away from you, to perhaps a kilometre away, depending on the lens, that's focused to infinity. Obviously our lightning is going to be somewhere in between those 2 ranges. We don't want it too much closer, could get a bit scary. And whatever landscape elements and all that you have in your image, they're normally going to be distant. Whether it's a distant wharf or a billabong or whatever you're trying to get in the foreground if you're trying to make a nice image. So we need to set our focus to infinity. It sounds pretty simple, but it can be a little bit tricky because it's night time. You can't see what you're focusing on, not very easily anyway. So I've got 2 ways to achieve this. But before I tell you, I just want to give you a couple of warnings. Some lenses have the little infinity symbol on the focus ring. And by the way, when you're manually focusing, which we need to do to focus manually to infinity, you'll be turning a ring on the actual lens, like a focus ring. You won't be using a camera like this. But a lot of these focus rings, I've actually got a symbol on there, and it's a little figure 8 on the side, infinity symbol, and you can line that up with a mark, and you think, oh, I'm set to infinity, but don't trust it. Some lenses actually do focus on infinity when they show infinity on that mark, but many don't, and most don't in my experience. So don't trust that. That would be a nice, easy way to focus on infinity. And likewise, when you turn the focal ring all the way to the end, a lot of people might assume that's infinity as well, but it actually goes past infinity. I know that doesn't make any logical sense. You can't go past infinity, but it's not focused on infinity. That's all I know. So don't trust that unless you know your lens and you've tried it. I did actually have an old landscape lens that would actually focus on infinity. It was a manual focus lens. When you locked it all the way around, it was great for lightning photography. I should have kept it. Sold it too cheap. Never mind. So yeah, I have 2 ways of getting that focus on infinity. The first way I'll probably use more commonly, but it's not necessarily the way I recommend, but it's a little bit quicker and easier if it works. It might not work with all cameras, it works with mine mostly. So yeah, you could try it with yours. And basically all I do, I pick out a distant light, and there's not always distant lights, and I'll get onto that, but like even a star, my camera focuses pretty good on really small lights like stars, or just a light post, or whatever. I'll set my camera to autofocus, press the button halfway down, or however you normally autofocus, lock it on there, then I'll switch it back to manual focus. And now my lens is set to infinity focus, and it's on manual focus. They're the two things I want, isn't it? But again, before you do that, make sure you've just tested that and it works right on your camera. The other way I do it, and more of these mirrorless cameras like I'm filming this with, is that they often have a feature, it's called focus peaking, or focus zooming. You can actually zoom right in on the the live image that you're photographing, and actually while you're looking at that zoomed in, you'll need your reading glasses if you're like me, or using the viewfinder. You can actually just tweak that focus and make sure those distant objects are sharp. So that's probably a safer way, a more recommended way. Sometimes you're going to be somewhere like really out bush, out in the scrub somewhere, and it's going to be pretty dark. Maybe it's a bit overcast. You've got no stars. You've got no distant street lights to focus on. There's no real easy solution to this. Basically, you might actually have to photograph a storm. Hopefully that storm in the distance, you're there for a reason. There's a storm, I assume. It's flashing away. You might actually have to wait for the flashes and try and focus on that cloud, and then take a couple of test shots, and then zoom in on those test shots, review them on the screen on the back, and make sure they're in focus. And actually a key to ensuring you're in focus is, even with those other methods, review your images quite consistently, and just make sure they are in focus. Like I say, a few times I've gone home, epic storm, all these awesome images I can't wait to look at on the computer, and they're just out of focus and unusable. Hurts, that does. One more gotcha with autofocus, sorry, I mean with manual focus. A lot of people have zoom lenses. If you set your focus to manual, you're focused on infinity, you're all set up, storm gets a bit closer, or you want to zoom in a bit more, so you change the zoom, you go wider, or you zoom in more. Most zoom lenses actually change their focus when they do that, so you've actually got to refocus on infinity each time you zoom in or out. Again, check your lens, but I dare say that would be the case. It's virtually the case of all lenses. So yeah, focusing is one of those real gotchas, but yeah, it's probably not as hard as I made it sound, but yeah, it's just something to keep an eye on, and again, the key is just reviewing your images. It's better to miss out on a couple of lightning bolts because you're reviewing your image, making sure they're sharp, than getting home and they're all blurry. Been there, done that. All right, we've got our camera all set up, I believe. We've got it on a tripod, we've got it pointed at a storm, we've got our shutter speed set to 30 seconds, we've got our aperture fairly wide open, f4, f5.6, we've got our ISO down nice and low to keep the noise levels down, we've got it focused manually on infinity. We're ready to go, basically. You really do just have to press your button now. Press your shutter button and take a photo. I can hear your questions right now, actually, like how do I know when the lightning's going to go? How do I capture that bit of lightning? It happens so quick. Well, keep in mind we're taking 30-second exposures. For those who are new to photography, and this is what this video is for, a lot of people think of a photograph as an instant in time, and these long 30-second exposures don't make a lot of sense, do they? Well, you are taking a photo for 30 seconds, so whatever happens in that 30 seconds, in this instance, there could be 4 bolts. You could be pointed over there, you press your button, 5 seconds later, 1 bolt, you're still taking the photo. 20 seconds later, we're 25 seconds into the photo, another bolt goes over there. After the 30 seconds, you finish taking the photo, you have 1, 2 bolts. So whatever happens during that 30 seconds will be captured. So that's the cool thing about nighttime, long exposure lightning photography. There's actually a better way than just to stand there pressing the button every 30 seconds. Although that's not such a bad thing anyway, and to be honest, I've done that quite a bit. Normally you're standing, you're enjoying the storm and watching the display anyway, so it's not such a bad thing, and pressing a button every 30 seconds isn't that draining, is it? But even better, most modern cameras have a inbuilt intervalometer, it's called, and basically it could be called interval shooting, and you can just set your camera to keep taking photos at X amount of time in between them or whatever. So I just set my camera to take a photo every, I think, 0.5 seconds between them, and it will just keep taking photos indefinitely. So yeah, basically I've set my camera up, I've got it on the tripod, I've got it at the storm, I set the intervalometer up, just keep taking pictures, sit back and enjoy the show. Again, keep an eye on the storm. You know, the bolts could be more focused over there or there, so you might want to adjust your angle of view. And that's basically it. Now you might think, you know, taking photos indefinitely, automatically, you're going to fill your memory card up pretty quick, aren't you? And you're going to get lots of photos. But remember, we're only taking 30-second exposures. So basically, we're taking 2 photos every minute. So, you know, if you've got the storm going for an hour, you know, good luck with that. I've never had a storm go for that long, or at least not that long where it's been worth photographing without moving. Yeah, 60 minutes, that's 120 photos. You know, with modern cameras and modern memory cards, it's nothing really. And yeah, when you get back home and look at your photos, you're going to have mostly, you know, boring photos, admittedly, unless it's a really cool scene and beautiful cloud and all that sort of stuff. But unless you've really hit the jackpot, you're only going to have a few, you know, really awesome bolts, and even then you've done really well. So yeah, it's a matter of just taking all these photos and then going home and having a look what you've got. Alright guys, well that's it. That's how you take lightning photography. Again, I'll be putting out a bit more advanced video on it. I'll also be putting a video out about this region, Darwin, where I live, but that'll be more for local people. And that'll just be about our weather patterns and, you know, good vantage points and how to get lightning around Darwin. This video is just more for anyone in the world, just how to capture lightning on a camera, and it'll do that, no worries. Alright, just in closing, I'll just give you a few tips, I reckon, just random tips, didn't really fit anywhere, but yeah, it might be helpful. The first tip is to shoot RAW if you can. Now, if you don't know what RAW is, don't worry about it too much. It's only an optional thing, but it is quite useful for this type of photography, or any type of photography really. I will be doing a video on shooting RAW, but suffice to say, if you're not sure, it's a bit too much at this stage, don't worry about it, just shoot as you normally do. But basically RAW just captures more, more information when you take a photo, and you get a little bit more out of your shadows and your highlights, more than you can see in a normal JPEG photo. And because lightning can be very bright, and sometimes the foreground can be really dark or whatever, you can just get a bit more out of the photos. But just something for a later date if you're not sure about it. Don't worry about that one too much. But shooting RAW is quite helpful. Just a couple of tips about storms themselves, I guess. First one is, if you're not hearing a lot of thunder, you're probably not going to get a lot of good bolts. You might have a storm coming and it's flashing away, crazily like a strobe light. If you're not hearing the thunder, and you can hear thunder from a long way, if you're not hearing the thunder, there's going to be no real good photogenic bolts that you're going to come out of it. Doesn't mean it won't change, of course. I'd still be pretty keen to set my camera up and wait for the bolts. It could change quickly. It might fade away into nothing. But yeah, where there's thunder, there's bolts, good bolts basically. So that's a good little one to remember. Another one is, don't be in too much of a hurry to leave early once the storms hit you. We don't all have unlimited time, do we? But you might have got a bit of a storm coming at you. You got a couple of shots and it starts raining. Well, if you don't have to, don't necessarily pack up and go home, because often the storm will go over you, the rain will stop, be out over the sea, for example. You get really good bolts coming out of the back of it sometimes, and lots of opportunities there. So that's just another quick tip. Don't necessarily pack up too quick when the storm's gone over you. And another tip is, sometimes you might be shooting a storm, you're taking photos every 30 seconds, like we've said. You don't really get any good bolts. It's a bit of a letdown. It comes at you and goes past you, and you've been taking photos all this time and you haven't really got anything decent. Well, often all isn't lost, because if you haven't even just got a few good pictures of storm clouds or scenery in your photograph, you've actually got a time lapse that you can make out of it. So all these frames that, if you put them together in a timeline, there's lots of free applications these days, and paid ones. You can make a really cool time lapse of that storm moving across, and the clouds bubbling up, and whatever they're doing. So yeah, keep that in mind. I've got a few pretty cool little time lapses just from doing that. Alright guys, well I reckon we'll wrap it up now. I hope you enjoyed the little video. I tried to just keep it short and sweet and not too technical. It is really just for beginners, as I said. Yeah, please subscribe to the channel, like the video if you like it. That'll just help me to keep making videos, and yeah, help keep you informed when I put videos out. So yeah, I hope you like this, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.